So, at some point, your family started talking about emigrating to Canada.
Yes, they did. It was after the Second World War, and I recall it was about 1948-49 that they started making plans to try and immigrate. And of course, at that time, we didn't know whether we were going to immigrate to Canada or not. The three choices suggested by the Dutch government for people wishing to leave the country because of economic trials and tribulations were Australia, South Africa, and Canada. And after some investigation, my parents decided it would be Canada. And I do recall that certainly I was always involved in the discussions, and I was kept informed of every stage of the procedure, that we would have to go to The Hague, to the Canadian Embassy, to be interviewed, to obtain our visas and clearance papers to get into Canada, and our inoculations. So the decision was, of course, not easy to come by, but my mother, I think, suggested that she was really the instigator of the decision to immigrate and leave the country. I think my father was at first a bit reluctant, but he certainly bought into the idea very, very quickly.
So what were some of the reasons for wanting to leave Holland? That's a pretty big decision.
Well, you're absolutely right, because you leave your friends, your home, your relatives, you know, your parents. Both my grandmothers were still alive, although my grandfathers had died by then. I think you have to harken back to what my father went through during the Depression in the 1930s. There was absolutely no work for him for about 3 or 4 years. And he was in his late teens, early 20s, and it was, in Holland they call it a malaise, and we know what that means, and it was called a depression in North America. But he was always alert to having a steady job and wanting to look after his family. He was the breadwinner, and boy, right to the very end, he remained the breadwinner of the family. So I think that going through the war experience kind of instilled in him the desire to have steady work and a better economic opportunity for himself and his family. And I think that's what motivated certainly him in the desire to come to Canada.
So were there problems with him getting work after the war?
Well, after the war, it wasn't so much the problem getting work. He had sporadic work inside Amsterdam. He had a boss named Frankenhout, Arie Frankenhout, and I remember it was a little carpentry shop just off a canal, and I visited my dad once in the middle of him making a checkerboard, and so I knew where it was, but it wasn't steady, and so he had to leave town and work in another city or town in Holland for a couple of years. So he would work out of town during the week and come home on the weekends. And it kind of showed me the difference in discipline handed out by my mother and my father. And when he was away and I did something I wasn't supposed to, my mother would chastise me and tell me, "I'm going to write down what you did in the scribbler, and then when your dad comes home on Friday night, he will deal with you." And of course, the first time that happened, I was fearful and wondered what my father was going to do to me. Well, what he did to me is said, "Well, I'll tell you how I'm going to deal with this. You're going to write lines for me 100 times or 200 times, I can't remember. I will not do whatever it was that I wasn't supposed to do." So, or he would give me a list of numerals to add up in my head in a very short period of time, and there were 2 or 3 pages of these sums, but I was able to finish them in very short order, and I kind of enjoyed it because it motivated my mind, and it kept my mind active, so to speak.
And were you a child that misbehaved a lot?
I wasn't a child that misbehaved a lot, but I did have a mind of my own, if I may say so, and of course that streak of having a mind of my own has unfortunately been passed down to my 2 boys, Daryl and Lindsay.
And do you remember any instances that where you maybe did something that you weren't supposed to? You would ended up being kind of scared about what you did.
Well, on one occasion, my parents never did find out about this, but I do recall it. If you remember, when I was in preschool with Juffrouw de Witt, one day on the way home, I and a few of my chums were standing around a fire alarm, looking around to see who was around, and one of us, it may have been me, but I honestly can't remember, we pulled the fire alarm, and we ran in all different directions, waiting for the, I guess, fire engines to come. The fire engines never did come, so maybe they were used to false alarms, but that was one thing I shouldn't have done.
And I think I recall you talking about a time that you got injured.
Yes, I think it was in grade 2. I was 8 years old, and I was playing on some round culverts that they used to lay storm sewers, and they were on top, ready for a construction project. And I was playing on top of them, and I fell, and I fell right on the edge with my knee, and my knee opened up. The gristle was shown, the bone could be seen, and I walked home, limped home, to be more accurate, and felt nauseous. I remember that. And we lived on the 3rd floor, so I had to climb up 3 flights of stairs because there was no phone. And when I then called my mom, she saw what had happened, and she almost fainted. So she was frightened, picked me up, carried me down 3 flights of stairs to the doctor, who was 2 blocks away. It was not my favorite person. It's the first time and only time I've been to see a doctor. His name was Dr. Backer, and he had absolutely no patience for me, certainly. And the reason, I think, for his having no patience for me is because I yelled and I said ouch, and I screamed. And the reason for that was he treated me with sutures, metal sutures, which he heated on a Bunsen burner, and put on my knee to close the wound, without giving me any kind of a painkiller on my knee. So no wonder I was screaming. So it healed up. I still have the scar, and but I've never had any problem with the knee whatsoever. The other memory I have is in 1949, so I was 8 years old. A lot of things happened when I was 8 years old. I learned how to swim, and within 2 months I got both what we call here our elementary and our secondary form of swimming diplomas. Over there they called it A and B, and I recall for my B diploma I had to dive down to the bottom of a swimming pool and bring up a heavy form of a human being as kind of a life-saving technique. And I passed with flying colors, and my dad carried me home on his shoulder. So and my grandmother had knitted me a towel. Now, her towels were like dishcloths, and you couldn't really dry yourself very well, but the thought was the one that counted.